Hey everyone, welcome to another NHD Quick Tip. This time we're going to focus on historical significance. So historical significance is a key component of any NHD project, and it is a key element on the new NHD evals, which you can learn more about and review at nhd.org/evals. So we need to start with the question of what is historical significance? So historical significance is the impact or consequences of your topic. So if you're doing a project, you need to think not only about what's happening in the moment, but those short-term impacts or consequences and those long-term impacts or consequences. You can find the complete definition of historical significance on page 8 in your NHD contest rulebook, which you can download at nhd.org/rules. When first working on historical significance, it can seem a little daunting. So we've come up with some tips to help you think about historical significance and your topic's significance to history. Your project should always think about historical significance by answering the question, so what? Historians always think about this so what question. What that means is, why do we care? Why is it important to our understanding of history? Always keep that in mind, right? When you're thinking about what is the impact, the consequences, the outcome of the topic that you're working on. So you want to keep this in mind in two ways. You want to think about those short-term effects, and then you want to think about those long-term effects. So if we're looking at a topic like prohibition, a short-term effect might be bootlegging, a rise in organized crime, because those are what we see happening at or after the Volstead Act, or prohibition as we know it, goes into effect. Now, a long-term effect might be that push or response against prohibition and the repeal of prohibition with the 21st Amendment a decade later. Quick NHD tip is that you should always keep historical significance in mind when selecting a topic. What do we mean by that? Well, one of the biggest questions that we get asked here at NHD is, how far back does my topic need to go? We like to say it should be enough time that you're able to see those short-term and long-term effects. That means staying away from current events. It's a history project, not a current events project. So if you have a topic that really interests you but is more of a current events topic, see if you can trace it back, because that way that current event may actually be a piece of the historical significance and a long-term effect rather than the topic that you want to focus on. So to help you understand this idea of historical significance a little more, we're going to take an example topic and break it down. This time our example topic is imperialism.
So we're looking at imperialism through New Zealand. So in 1840, the British Empire established a colony in New Zealand, and they established this colony using the Treaty of Waitangi, which is an agreement between the British government and the indigenous Maori people. In addition to establishing the colony, this treaty would recognize the Maori as owning their own land, as owning their own forests and their possessions, and it also gave the Maori the rights of British subjects. However, if we just look at the treaty, we don't get to see how that's impacted New Zealand's history and the history of imperialism in New Zealand. So we're going to look at the short-term and long-term impacts of this treaty. So the short-term impact was the treaty was often ignored, which created hostility and tension between the Maori and the British colonists that were living in New Zealand at the time. The long-term impact of this is that these tensions and this hostility ultimately led to the New Zealand Wars, which lasted from 1845 to 1872. So we can see not just the treaty, but what happened right after the treaty was signed, and then what ultimately that treaty led to with that long-term impact.
And sometimes we can even take it further, right? So what is the relationship between the Maori and the British today?
Don't forget to review historical significance on page 8 in the NHD rulebook. You can find this at nhd.org/rules. And don't forget to review historical significance on your category's evaluation. So go to nhd.org/evals and you can find your particular category.